Why would any athlete who is prepared for 4 years want to step away right minutes before their competition on the biggest stage possible?
Many athletes train their body for years, but what about their minds? How do an athlete train their mind, and why it is so important?
There are 4 things that are really important when you want to become a professional athlete.
How is mental imagery and manifestation different?
Manifestation is, mental imagery is the process of really and truly walking through the execution of every single thing. Manifestation is more like vision boarding. So you set a goal vision of where I want to be.
If it's an amateur athlete, he wants to start developing his mind, he's training his body, he'll start training his mind also. So what steps should he start taking from point zero? Today's episode is with Shyamal Vallabhji, a sports psychologist. Welcome to the Manav Show, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I was thoroughly excited about this.
Yes.
And looking forward to deep diving into some of these topics.
So, sir, this is going to be a milestone for me at the Manav Show because I have been looking over your journey for like almost a year now. It comes with personal interest also. We will discuss that in the podcast ahead. So, moving forward, I just wanted to, we'll start with the podcast. Many athletes train their body for years, but what about their minds? How do an athlete train their mind, and why it is so important?
So there are 4 things that are really important when you want to become a professional athlete. One is the physical aspect. So you're training your body, and a lot of people take care of that, physical and nutritional. The second is called your technical proficiency, which is your skills, how well you can execute a skill. The third important component is strategy and awareness. So how do you apply your strengths and weaknesses in a game plan, in a strategy to get the results you want to? And then the fourth one is mental toughness. Unfortunately, mental toughness is probably one of the most important, but the least trained. And the reason it's often overlooked is because a large part of the physical aspects of training and the technical aspects, they do develop some components of the mental aspect, but not in its entirety. So it is very, very vitally important. It's very overlooked, but athletes take it for granted because just through the sheer repetition of practicing, they are getting mentally stronger, but not to the degree that they actually need to be able to excel at the sport at the highest level.
Okay. So, I just while researching, I also got a fact that is during the 2006 Winter Olympics, researchers found that 70% of the Olympic athletes or the medalists used mental imagery.
Correct.
As a part of their training.
Correct.
So, how important is this?
Mental imagery is critically important, and that research paper that you quoted was one of the pivotal research papers around mental imagery and visualization. For everyone listening, what the paper did was the scientists broke that group of people up into 3 different groups. They broke them up into a group that did 0 mental imagery at all. It wasn't a part of their training. The second group did mental imagery, but they did it in their hotel room. Okay. And the third cohort did mental imagery, but they did it at the venue where they were competing. Okay. Right. And every single time that they repeated the study, not only that they found that the groups who did mental imagery were the most successful, but they found that those that did mental imagery in the place of competition always had the best results. So this research paper was very, very pivotal because it taught us 2 things. One is it taught us that mental imagery activates the same neurological and physiological pathways in the body as actually practicing yourself, right? So that's why it's physically important. The second thing is that when you start to do mental imagery in the space where you're competing in, you are able to channel all of your cognitive load towards performance. When you are doing mental imagery in your hotel room, a large part of your cognitive bandwidth goes towards reframing and recreating the environment before you can even think of execution. Whereas if you do it in that environment, everything is going directly towards execution. So this research paper was very, very critical in that. And mental imagery visualization is probably the number one mental training tool that most elite athletes use. And it's something that gets better with time. You have to practice it. You get better with filling in those details. And you can start to neurologically and physiologically feel what it feels like to perform.
Okay. So how is mental imagery and manifestation different?
Manifestation is mental imagery is the process of really and truly walking through the execution of every single thing.
Okay.
Manifestation is more like vision boarding, so you set a goal vision of where I want to be. Like, let's say I want to I want to be at the Olympics in 2028, for example, if you say that, right? And I want to compete in this event. Now, you set a manifestation and an intention to be there, but there are lots of steps in between, right? Mental imagery comes down to the granular details that you're playing through in your mind. Manifestation is more what we call gestalt. It's big picture. The imagery is more granular in details. And the more granular your details are, the more your body can feel it, can absorb it, and the better the chance of that actually manifesting.
Okay, so it's just like observing the environment around us, like observing the stadium that we are into, we are performing. So that can be said as mental imagery.
That's one part of it. The ecosystem is one part of it. Mental imagery is everything from, like, okay, you could visualize, for example, if you're a bowler, you could do a mental imagery exercise or a exercise of how you would start your run up and how you would bowl and then how you would walk back to the top end of it and do it again. Okay. Or you could visualize, okay, I went to bed. How am I going to go to bed the previous night? Right? What am I going to do? What mind frame I'm going to be at? How I'm going to rest? How I'm going to wake up? What I'm going to eat for breakfast? What's my routine going to be? What am I going to pack in my bag? How I'm going to go to the stadium? Where am I going to sit? When I'm going to walk around? How am I going to prepare? What is the feeling? What is the sound? What is the smell? What does it feel like physically to touch, to hold the ball? So imagery can go to that extent, or it could be as small as just that. But the bigger the picture, the more details you put into it, the more complex it is, the easier it is for your body to understand it and replicate it.
Okay. This is the part of mental imagery, but when we talk about mental toughness, it is often described as grit and resilience. So according to you, what truly defines mental toughness?
Mental toughness is the ability to stick to a process that you've determined.
Okay.
Right. So a mentally tough athlete is not necessarily someone who's going through adversity and pushing through it. Right. Sometimes there's adversity, sometimes there's no adversity. Okay. Mental toughness is what? Is you saying that, okay, I have got a set plan that I want to execute. A mentally tough athlete is someone who's able to stick to that plan. Right. An athlete who's not mentally tough will keep changing the plan in relation to all of the changing variables around him. And as a result, he would get stressed, he'd get anxious, and you wouldn't even know if your plan is working. So the first part of mental toughness is in skill execution, in mastering a skill. The second part of it is in developing that game strategy, that plan, and then coming together where you stick to that plan irrespective of what's happening. Because, see, in sport, the win and the loss both are very, very important. Right. Both teach you the same amount of things. Right. But as long as you keep changing a plan, you have no data on anything, irrespective of what the result is. So the win or the loss is the result for the public. Right. Whether a process worked or it didn't work is the result for the athlete or the result for a coach like myself. Now, mental toughness is the ability to stick to that routine or that process.
Okay. I would like to give an example here, not example, a real life example that I have seen from my eyes. So my dad is an Ironman athlete. Okay. He has done almost 9 Ironmans. Amazing. And I don't remember the country, maybe Germany it was. During his cycling time, he fell from his cycle and he had bruises all over his back. He was bleeding all over his knees. He was bleeding and he's around 52, 51, 52. And we told him to quit. Like, just stop, because he was literally bleeding, but he just did the dressing and he again start. he started his cycling. So
Yeah.
can we say that this is also mental toughness, or this is pushing?
It is mental toughness, right? Because, um, you know, and the difference with Ironmans and the difference in sport, the same thing happens to me when I'm an ultra marathon runner. So
Okay.
when I'm running 50, 60K, 100K races, there comes times when my feet are bleeding.
Right.
There comes times when my muscles cramping. I'm in a lot of pain. I'm hungry. I'm bloated. I'm all of these things. These are a lot of people have told me at various points in time, stop. You can't even walk, right? But I continue. Now, it's mental toughness is a component of pushing through. But what is happening with your dad is that it's also mental visualization or mental imagery. Because in a part of the preparation, your dad has at some stage thought of falling off the bike. He's thought of getting blisters. He's thought of getting and he's already processed what will make him stop and what will not make him stop. You understand? So when that happened, okay, it was not a condition that allowed him to stop because he'd already processed, I won't stop.
Right.
You had not processed that condition. That's
Yep.
why it was a condition to allow you to stop. So this is very, very important, what we're talking about, because when you start to do mental preparation for sport and imagery, you have to consider the best and the worst case situations. Because sometimes things can be going so well that you doubt it. And then sometimes things can be going very, very badly and you also doubt it. Both are equally detrimental. And if you don't think about them, both of them will derail you from a plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's an amateur athlete, he wants to start developing his mind. He's training his body also. He wants to start training his mind also. So what steps should he start taking from point zero?
The main thing is to start by being comfortable with yourself.
Okay.
Start to carve out distractions. Start to create mental space for yourself, which means just being able to be by yourself, to be able to think without any distractions, just to be comfortable. Once we create mental space, then we can use that mental space and teach it how to focus or what to focus on and all of that. If the mind is cluttered, if the body is cluttered, if the body is in physical pain, if your body is not healthy, if you are inundated with distractions, you can't even begin that process of mental training. So the very, very first step is to just every day for say 15, 20 minutes, just say to yourself, I'm not going to do anything, sit on a chair exactly like how we are. And maybe just start by counting your breaths, just stay with the count, go in and out and count 1, 2. If you lose the count, you start again from 1. See how high that number can go. It's a very powerful exercise. Some of my athletes get to more than 2,000 breaths. They just can stay there and they just go in, out 1, in, out 2. Now, if you lose the count, it means your mind is it's switched. It went to somewhere else, right? But if you can hold it for 2,000 or 500 breaths or 50 breaths, there's a time limit in here. So you know that this is my ability to focus is linked to this before the mind goes. And you want to start to increase that time, because once you increase that time, you'll be more in control of all of the variables around you. So this is a very powerful exercise and a great starting place.
Okay. So as you said about meditation, you said about breathing. So how important is meditation also in when it comes to mental toughness?
So the different forms of meditation, I've worked with musicians who just playing your art is meditative. Worked with yogis who are chanting, people are doing breath work. Even playing your sport, even going for a run is a form of meditation.
Okay.
What is meditation? Meditation is when the brain is able to carve out all its distractions or keep distractions at bay and hold its focus on a particular exercise. So, for example, in yoga, you could be holding your focus on a particular position irrespective of what the body is experiencing. In breath work, it's bringing the mind back to the breath. In running, it's being mindful of every single step. Musicians get lost into a state of flow, which is a meditative state whilst playing music. So what happens in a meditative state is that you are able to keep all of your distractions at bay and you're able to use all of your faculties to navigate variables so that you can execute and what you want to in the best way possible. So we call it flow states in sports and this thing, but it's also a meditative state.
Okay. So many fans were shocked when Simone Biles stepped back from competition to focus herself on mental health. So, what does the story of her reveal about pressure that elite athletes have to handle?
Simone Biles was quite an extraordinary and courageous thing she did to step back from competition at a time, she was young, at the biggest stage, the biggest platform. It really put the spotlight on how important mental health is, because it was a very, very neglected component in the world of sport. We think that we just have to keep pushing, and it comes at a price. So she showed us that sometimes that price is far too much, and sometimes that price for a young girl or a young athlete is too much. We didn't settle for that price. They weren't prepared for that price. Right. So what the Simone Biles story has done is put the spotlight on the importance of mental health in performance. Having said that, right, pressure is a large part of competing at that highest level. Right? So when you're working with the right coach and you're working with the right mental training team, they'll help you to cope with the pressures at that time. Okay. So that story indicated a few things. One is that, the pressure obviously existed, but the support system around may not have been adequate enough. Because why would any athlete who was prepared for 4 years want to step away right minutes before their competition on the biggest stage possible? It's not ideal. She was brave enough to do it, but it's also indicative of the fact that maybe, the preparation was adequate physically, nutritionally, strength-wise, but not adequate mentally. That was another important learning from that entire story. So, which comes back to where we started the podcast, how important it is to have this holistic development when preparing.
And we have seen this in Indian cricket also. Ishan Kishan, 2 years back or a year back, he told that he's not mentally fit, and he removed himself from the Indian team. And before that, he had scored a double century.
Yeah.
And then he was dropped and he was not taken in the Indian team. And now again, he's come back in the test team. So, and you have worked with a lot of cricketers also. So how is the mindset of cricketers? Because they go with lot of pressure, so much of fame around.
Cricket in India is quite exemplary because there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of competition as well. So you could be good, you could be great, and still not get an opportunity. Actually, one of the better examples of how good you can be and not get an opportunity is actually Karun Nair.
Right.
Karun he got dropped from the test team after scoring 300. I think he averaged more than 700 runs last season now, or this current season in the Vijay Hazare Trophy. He's done everything right, not got a look in. Because to get a look in means there has to be a gap, and sometimes there isn't a gap. For the longest time, there were a lot of great wicket keepers in India, but the position went to Dhoni. For the longest time, Australia produced many, many great wicketkeepers, but Adam Gilchrist was there for 15 years. You can't do anything about it, So sometimes the timing is wrong, and it has nothing to do with you. So to attribute your skill level to the entitlement that I should get an opportunity is not the right way to look at it. There is no entitlement in sport. We work every day, we pursue, we wait for an opportunity, and if that opportunity comes, we should be prepared for it. That's why we practice. Our practice doesn't give us the entitlement that we should be selected. It just ensures that if we are selected, we're the best person for the job at that time.
Okay. As you gave an example of Karun Nair also, he came back to an Indian A team and he scored a double century again.
Yeah.
And so how can you differentiate between a good athlete and a great athlete?
The difference between good and great, I mean, this is a fascinating conversation. And in my opinion, the athletes that move from good to great are the ones who are the most compassionate to themselves.
Sure.
Right? What do I mean by that? I mean, if you're playing at an elite level, okay, 80% of the time you're going to fail. 80% of the time you're dealing with failure. Now, every time you deal with a failure, your brain's going to start to have a certain narrative. Okay, that narrative is going to reiterate something, and that's going to either raise your confidence or self-esteem or drop it down. Okay, Just that single thing, not a single other person. If the narrative is negative, it's going to pull you down. If 80% of the time you're failing and 80% of the time that narrative is negative, you won't even try again, right? So those who make it to great are the ones who are prepared to try again. So the question is, what is it that their brain is telling them that allows them to try again? That's the question we should be asking. So the path from good to great has nothing to do with practice. It has to do with honing what your brain tells itself in the face of adversity, in the face of failure. If that tone and those words are positive, they're reaffirming, they're reassuring, right? And they are compassionate and kind, you will return. And the more often you return, then you're giving yourself the best chance of becoming great. So that's the difference between good and great.
So can we decode Hardik Pandya here in this? Because we have seen that last year he was booed a lot. His personal life has been very bad. After that, when he came to Mumbai Indians team, he was booed a lot that why he's made the captain. And his performance was not that great. But right now, if we see, his performance has gone very high. He's playing at a very good, he's at a very good mindset. So can we decode him? Has he become a great player with all the things that have gone through him?
He is a great player, and his statistics show that. The second thing is, because you're a great player doesn't mean that every single time you perform, you will perform at a particular level. Every one of us has these ups and downs, but the chart is moving consistently in the right direction. Okay. The second thing is, what we fail to understand with athletes is that you cannot judge an athlete by what happens in 5 days in a test or 3 hours in a game, because he's the same human being who's leading life and dealing with so much else. He's dealing with the stresses of the fans. He's dealing with his personal life. We don't know. Right. For most people, we have no idea what they're experiencing. Right. So it's very unfair to make a judgment on the basis of a result or a score. Actually, even the conditions on that day could determine something. And also, you could have done everything right and be feeling great, and you just get an unplayable ball, or the person on the other side of it has a little bit of luck on their side. So the coin falls on their side. There are many, many variables. So it's not really good. I don't generally like to entertain conversations or ask people to have conversations where we are discussing a particular player and whether they're good or great. Because there are far too many things that are beyond our awareness to be able to answer that question with any level of conviction. And it doesn't do any justice to them, and it's not a very self-serving question. Right? But what we should start to do is look at things more holistically. And in every one of our lives, we should be looking at, okay, from this quarter to the next quarter to the next quarter, there have been ups and downs, but is the growth part moving in the right direction? Right. Or is the growth part moving in the wrong direction? Right. And on the basis of that, we can start to make certain changes. Not on the basis of a particular tournament or a particular game or a particular season or whatever it is. It takes time. Journey is about those ups and downs. And downs are unfortunately where we learn from. And so we have to appreciate that. And the beautiful thing is that, you're able to appreciate the greatness of Hardik Pandya in the example that you used, not because he performed all the time, but because he failed sometimes. Remember that, right? It was because he failed that you were able to see his greatness. If he never failed, you wouldn't see the greatness, right? You can only appreciate light in the shadow. So very, very important to approach everything from the yin and yang perspective.
It's about changing your perspectives how you see the things.
Correct.
Okay. So if a player or maybe I want to typically have a session with a sports psychologist, so how would that session look like?
Depends on what the problem is, and it depends on what the psychologist's specialty is, and depends on what you want to kind of fix and who you're looking at. There's a whole bunch of specialists. For example, I'm a performance specialist. I work only on getting people to thrive. So I'm working only on mindset around getting people to shatter the glass ceiling of their belief systems. I'm also someone who specializes in teams. So I build the culture around excellent performing teams. So when I'm working with a team, I don't work with individuals in that team because it's a conflict of interest. I can't be working with an individual knowing all of these things. And what do I care about, you, or do I care about the result of the team? So different people will have different key areas of expertise. Once you understand what you're looking for, then you find that person. Even in clinical psychology, you can have someone who specializes in childhood trauma, someone who specializes in abuse. Even in abuse, you have different types of abuse. You have emotional abuse, you have sexual abuse, you have, all sorts of things that come into that. So once you know what you're looking for, you'll find an expert, and that person will start to guide that process for you.
You are part of the Kings 11 Punjab team also. So how do you see that team transforming now, coming into the finals and performing?
I mean, I think the team has done, it's been a long time coming for them. They shaped up really, really nicely. They surprised me this year. I didn't think they would have made the finals, but full credit they did there. And it was a good game. Under the leadership of Shreyas, they've had some really good players that have come back and forth. I think Ricky Ponting is an exceptionally smart person, good captain, good leader. So I think they're doing that. And from the one thing that you can see in the way results translate is, I've been in enough locker rooms. So without even speaking to the management of Kings 11, I can tell you that, they're probably trusting that leadership and that management a lot more than they trusted previous managements.
Okay.
Because when a management team is trusted, they're able to execute with a level of freedom that you see expressed in the results and the way people play.
Okay.
And looking at all of the coaches Kings have had, Ricky Ponting is, one of the few who's right up there as an absolute stalwart, as an analytical mind, someone who can, hold the credibility of the unit together, someone who people will listen to, someone who's well-read, well-respected, great strategist, can mobilize the unit together, has done it successfully for decades with Australia. So I think they have the right person and they've given him the freedom, and then the results are showing. Like I said, without having conversations with too many people, this is just my perspective from how things are playing out. And I think, next season and the seasons onwards could be telling now for them. I think they're maturing to that point.
Right. Because Shreyas Iyer's mindset said it very well. The mindset that he had in the podcast that we're talking about, when they lost their first qualifier match, when they had to go to the finals, in that he said, we have lost the battle, not the war.
Correct.
And that shows the mindset that the players have built.
Yeah.
And talking about Shashank Singh also, before the start of the IPL, on one of the podcasts, he had said that I see Punjab Kings on top 2. And I think so that's very well the mental imagery that we talked about, the mental toughness that talks about, it has all come, and that's the reason the team has done so well.
Yeah. No, the team has done exceptionally well. You're 100% right. That this is, it's a byproduct of the mindset. And, that mindset is, when things like this are repeated on a regular day-to-day basis, what happens is it becomes a culture in the team. The culture in the team will help dictate the results. That's the most important thing. Yeah.
So for someone who is listening right now, who is facing performance anxiety or feeling stuck, what's the first mental shift they can make today to regain the confidence in the performance?
I think the best thing you can start to do is you have to rewire the brain. So start looking at performances where you did exceptionally well, videos of your past performances. Watch more of that. Start to pick up clues, start to see how you're feeling, think about who were you spending time with, right? Then analyze your environment. If there are people in your environment that are bringing you down, that are speaking negatively, start to create some space around them. I'm also a very, very big fan of, if you're going through a bad patch, start to cleanse that environment, which means start to put things away, pack things away, shove them, clean space. The more clean space you have physically, the cleaner the mind will be. A clean mind will be able to process things, right? Start to write your questions down, journal, start thinking about it. This is the process of how you can deconstruct bad performances and start to change that energy, right? And listen to a lot of motivational talks. Listen to talks around that raise your self-esteem, raise your confidence, build you up. Very, very important. Once you start to do this here, we'll be moving in the right direction.
Okay. So when you're working with athletes, what's the biggest mental hurdle you find that they are struggling with? Means maybe a fear of failure, self-doubt, or something else. What is it like?
The biggest mental battle is fear of failure, for sure, is one of the biggest things, and they self-sabotage their own success. So they start thinking about the outcome before anything. They place everything on the outcome, and you can understand why, So fear of failure is one of the biggest, but the mind can move into one of four places. The mind can be either in the future or in the past, and you can be thinking about something positive or negative. And all four spaces are detrimental. So if you're in the past, but you're thinking of something positive, you could be overconfident. Okay. If you in the past were you thinking of something negative, then you could be fearful or doubtful. Okay. When you in the future thinking of something positive, then you have what's called premeditation. You're thinking about how this outcome is going to manifest before it even manifests. So you dull to all of the changing variables outside. And if you're in the future thinking of something negative, then you have what's called a paralysis of action. You don't even know how to act. You get tense, nervous, you don't perform. You're very, very stuck. Okay. All four of these mental states are actually detrimental, So people seem to think that you need a positive mindset. Yes, you need a positive mindset to build your confidence. But during execution, you need a neutral mindset to be able to judge all of the variables that are coming in there, And the interesting thing is that the mind has a pattern. So some of us will go to overconfidence, past positive all the time. You may have had one success and your mind just keeps living on that one success and you keep going back to that place. And some people could have 100 successes and one failure, and the brain keeps projecting to that one failure. And then you have a catastrophe syndrome where a person, irrespective of how many successes they've had, their brain is always thinking about the next failure. That's future failure. Now, each person's brain operates in a certain pattern. It would do yourself justice by understanding where your brain goes, because the tools and techniques to pull it back to a neutral space are different for each one of these four.
Okay. So do you know any underdog athlete that has completely outshined his performance?
I mean, there are lots of athletes who are underdogs, and an underdog athlete doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is lower ranked or higher ranked playing against someone who's better ranked. It doesn't necessarily mean that a team who's weaker is playing against a better team. That's not the underdog. The underdog is, in psychology, we look at an underdog and a champion, right? And in preparation, they both prepare exactly the same. The difference between the underdog and the champion is in how you accept the result. Underdogs would accept failure because they thought that was a part of their process, right? And they felt they were outplayed or they were done. They just accept the result and that's it. A champion is someone who, irrespective of the result, uses that result to go back to the drawing board to relearn. Remember, underdog is not a result. Underdog is not a team. Underdog is a mindset. Champion is not a person. Champion is not a team. Championship is a mindset. So champions' mindsets are we constantly going back to relearn. Underdog mindset is we just accepting the result. and we go about our routine as normal, but that result doesn't invoke in you a pain so deep that it pushes you back to reinvent yourself. If that thing is not happening, then you're the underdog, irrespective of how many wins you've had.
Okay. So how do we develop this champion mindset?
You develop a champion mindset by firstly being passionate about what you're doing and not caring about the result, caring about what you're doing. That's the main thing. I was coaching a kid this morning, one of my friend's sons, and I was saying he doesn't like mathematics. And I asked him, why is mathematics important? And his answer to me was, mathematics is important because if I don't get a high score, it brings down my chemistry and my physics scores. So I said, well, that's why you're not doing well at mathematics, because that's a terrible answer. So if you start to reframe why something is important, and you reframe it through love, through compassion, through passion, like if you start to say mathematics is important because it allows me to see the world beautifully, it allows me to understand the beauty that I already see. I'm able to see why a picture looks so beautiful like this, or why a flower opens in a certain way, or all of this. Once you start to look things through that lens, then you develop a deep passion for it. And once you develop a deep passion, you can learn a lot more through that. So what's critically important is, remember, don't worry about underdog, don't worry about champions, don't worry about good, don't worry about great. We have got, for everyone listening, including yourself and myself, we've got decades before this language even comes into it. What we should do is, we have the right and within full freedom to follow what we are passionate about, what we are curious about. So follow these two parts of passion and curiosity relentlessly every day, right? And then one day you'll wake up and maybe the word good or great could apply to you. Maybe the word champion could apply to you, right? But be relentless in your pursuit of what is passionate and what is creatively curious for you.
Okay. We want to end on this, and I would like you to, if you could give an advice on how a non-athlete or maybe an individual can start training his habit on mental health, or training or touching about mental health or mental toughness. So how should he start about?
So the best way to start is to take a simple exercise. If you want to become a good writer, and you say, hey, listen, I'm going to write 500 words every single morning before I do anything. Or even if you want to go even easier, saying, hey, listen, I'm going to do 10 push-ups or 20 push-ups or 10 squats or 20 squats or whatever. It has to be so simple, right? It shouldn't take half an hour. It should take 5 minutes to do, right? The best way to train mental toughness is then you start to do this every single day without missing a single day, right? And every day you do it, you have a little dot or a little cross, and that cross will become a chain, a long chain. And the longer the chain is, the more mentally tough you are. Now, the secret is that it has to be so simple and so easy that you will do it. If you make it difficult, you'll find an excuse not to do it. And it has to be so simple that you cannot make an excuse to not do it. You can easily not do it, but there's no excuse will justify not doing it. It's like, for example, if I say, I'm going to do 10 push-ups every day. 10 push-ups is not going to make you stronger at all, right? 10 push-ups is not going to take more than 30 seconds, right? But you could very easily not do it. And there's no excuse, including someone dying, for you to not do 10 push-ups, because it takes so little time and it takes so little effort, right? That the only reason you don't do it is if you don't want to do it. That means the mind is broken. So when you create something really, really small as a starting point, and you do it every single day, then what will happen is, one day you'll wake up and you will be very, very disciplined and very, very strong. And I remember this because when I lived in the temple, I said this many, many years ago, 2004. I said, I learned that, we had to wake up in the temple every day at 3:30 a.m. I lived there for almost 4 years. Okay. Every single day, 3:30, 4 a.m. 3:30, I had to wake, 4 a.m. I had to be in the temple. I lived in a dormitory style with about 15 other monks, so everyone had to wake up. So because everyone's waking up, you can't sleep, you wake up yourself.
Right.
So the environment you're in is critically important. Now, there are days you wake up when you are exhausted and you can't even focus on any meditation. Zero. And there are days you wake up when you're feeling great and you feel in a state of flow with that meditation. And then the days you wake up when you're feeling terrible, but 10 minutes into it, you find yourself into a state of flow. Right? Now, every day you wake up, the mind is somewhere else. I would tell you, realistically, more than 50% of the time, if I was alone, I would have turned and probably went to sleep. Right? The discipline has to break you before it makes you. You have to repeat that same thing over and over and over and over again, even on days when you don't want to, even on days when it's really hard, even on days when it's really cold. You have to do it, irrespective of where you are. And only when you can do it so long, when there's no end in sight, okay, then that discipline recultivates and makes you who you are. So starting place, pick something really small and don't set a date. Don't say this is a 60-day, 1-year challenge, 100-day challenge, 1,000. No, I'm going to do this every single day for the rest of my life. You will only start to learn from something when there's no end in sight. You know, as long as there's an end in sight, your brain will pull all of its mental faculties and motivate you to get there. Once you get the line, the next day you're back to square one. There should be no end in sight. So the greatest meditators, we go to monasteries in Japan and China and in India, they've been meditating and chanting for 40 years. Right? You don't get to 40 years by setting a goal for 40 years. And when will they stop? They'll stop when they take their last breath.
Right.
You know? Right. It's just part and parcel of who you are. And that's when you become a master. Like when you do something like this, discipline, every single day, as small as it is, with no end in sight, then what happens is something beautiful happens, is that skill and your mind merge into one. And you start to see the whole world through that skill. That's mastery. Mastery is when you're able to see an entire world through the skill you've dedicated your entire life to.
Right.
You know, that is it. So, for example, if you look at the late Zakir Hussain, he was a tabla maestro. He saw everything in the world through the beauty of what the tabla brought in. His greatest friends, the greatest impact, the greatest shows, the greatest experiences, his greatest travels, all manifested because of that. The greatest artists who dedicate every single day, everything comes together through that there. The greatest athletes, all of the most beautiful lifelong moments, experiences, they all manifest through that there. When you dedicate something tirelessly, without end in sight, it merges and you start to see everything. Your whole world opens up through that lens.
Right. So it was a very interesting conversation with you. We got to learn a lot of things, and I especially got to learn a lot of things about mental toughness, how we can apply it, how can I use it. For surely I'm going to apply it. I hope our viewers also do it. Thank you so much for the opportunity, sir.
Thank you very, very much. I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of it. Thank you so much. Thank you all.